In 1953, British television had no established language for serious drama. There were plays, there were adaptations, there were performances broadcast live from studios. But there was no sense yet that television itself could generate urgency, dread, and intellectual seriousness on its own terms. The Quatermass Experiment changed that. Not because it introduced monsters or science fiction or spectacle, but because it showed for the first time how television drama could be structured around institutional failure. This is where Nigel Kneale invents modern television drama. At the centre of the story is an experiment that moves too quickly. A rocket launch carried out before its implications are understood, a system driven by ambition, prestige and momentum rather than caution or ethics. From the opening episodes, authority is already under strain. The project exists, the launch has happened, and responsibility is fragmented across departments and hierarchies. No one fully owns the consequences. Decisions are distributed, delayed, and deferred. This is not villainy, it is process. And that distinction matters. Kneale's great insight is that disaster does not require evil intent. It only requires systems that act before they understand what they are doing. The catastrophe at the heart of the Quatermass experiment is not the result of curiosity gone wrong. It is the result of procedure moving faster than thought. Once the damage is done, the institutions responsible struggle to respond. Information is incomplete. Authority is contested. Jurisdiction becomes a barrier rather than a solution. What makes the drama compelling is not the mystery itself, but the way knowledge spreads unevenly. Some people know too much, others know nothing, and those in charge know just enough to hesitate. And hesitation is the real antagonist here. Every delay increases the scale of the threat. Every request for confirmation buys time that cannot be afforded, and yet the system continues to behave as if time is abundant. This is the structure Kneale invents, drama driven by procedural paralysis. Television had not done this before. The format of the serial allows pressure to accumulate in real time. Events are not neatly resolved within an episode. Consequences carry over. Mistakes compound. Importantly, the story does not reassure the audience that expertise will prevail. Quatermass himself is not a traditional hero. He is abrasive, impatient, and deeply frustrated by the very institutions he nominally represents. He does not command the system, he fights it. This is another crucial shift. Authority is not embodied in a single figure. It is dispersed, bureaucratic, and often contradictory. The people who should act are constrained by procedure. The people who can act lack legitimacy. Kneale understands that modern catastrophe is administrative before it is physical. The horror of the Quatermass experiment does not come from the unknown alone. It comes from the recognition that once a system is set in motion, it is extraordinarily difficult to stop. Even when everyone involved realizes something has gone wrong. This is why the serial feels so contemporary, even now. The language of responsibility is already familiar. Reports must be filed, committees consulted, chains of command respected. All of this happens while the situation deteriorates. The story never suggests that science itself is the problem. What it critiques is institutional confidence without ethical reflection. The experiment was not evil, it was premature. And once it fails, the system lacks the mechanisms to respond quickly or decisively. This is where the Quatermass experiment quietly establishes a template that television would use for decades. Drama is no longer about individual moral choice alone. It is about how systems behave under stress. Characters are trapped inside structures that resist urgency and clarity. That idea that systems fail because they are designed to hesitate becomes one of Kneale's enduring concerns. What makes this particularly striking in 1953 is how unprepared television was for it. The serial does not soften its implications. It does not reassure. It does not restore confidence at the end. The damage done cannot be undone. The lesson, such as it is, arrives too late. That refusal to console the audience is part of what makes this feel like the birth of modern television drama. Earlier broadcasts might have ended with resolution or moral clarity. The Quatermass Experiment ends with exhaustion and unease. The system survives, but only just. And that survival is not framed as success. This is television discovering that it can do more than entertain. It can interrogate the structures that shape modern life. Kneale's use of science fiction is instrumental, not decorative. The speculative elements allow him to place pressure on institutions without naming real ones. This gives the drama freedom to be critical without being didactic. The threat is extraordinary, but the response is recognisably ordinary. People argue about responsibility, they delay decisions, they protect jurisdictions. In doing so, they make things worse. This is the fundamental pattern that the Quatermass Experiment introduces, and it will recur throughout Kneale's work. What changes in later stories is not the diagnosis, but the scale. Here, the failure is new, raw, and urgent. The system has not yet learned how to defend itself against criticism. It is still exposed. That exposure is what gives the serial its power. Television, at this point, had not yet learned to cushion institutional critique. It had not developed the reflexes that later drama would use to soften or deflect responsibility. As a result, the Quatermass Experiment feels unusually direct. It does not blame individuals. It does not suggest reform will solve the problem. It simply shows what happens when authority moves faster than understanding and then cannot slow itself down. This is why it matters as the first entry in the Quatermass sequence. Everything that follows, infiltration, denial, arrogance, collapse, builds on this foundation. But here, at the start, the failure is simplest and most devastating. The system acts before it knows what it is doing. That single decision creates a chain of consequences that no amount of expertise can fully control. In 1953, that was a radical idea, and in many ways it still is. The Quatermass Experiment does not just introduce a character or a genre, it introduces a way of thinking about drama itself, as an examination of how modern systems behave when confronted with the consequences of their own momentum. That is why it belongs at the start of any discussion of Nigel Kneale. This is where television learns how to be serious. So unfortunately, as most of you will know, there are only 2 episodes of the Quatermass that exist. This is not due to the policy of wiping and reusing tapes. The Quatermass Experiment went out live. So they did record a couple direct from a TV screen, but it wasn't really working out and they stopped. There is a film made by Hammer and a remake that came about the year 2000. Neither really are a patch on Kneale's TV work, but they do tell you the story. My advice is to see if you can find the script books for the Quatermass serials, because that will show you what Kneale put on the page. So having said that, there's nothing left for me to say other than I will be back another time with another television show. Bye!